From the opinion pages of the Wall Street Journal, this is Potomac Watch.
Democrats will soon lose their House majority, but before they return to the minority, they're going to spend this week dumping 2 years of investigation material on Donald J. Trump. The House January 6th committee will vote today on criminal referrals, including what may be as many as 3 referrals against Donald Trump. On Tuesday, the Ways and Means Committee will meet to vote on whether to release publicly 6 years of Trump's tax returns, and then Thursday, the January 6th committee will release its final report. All of this at a time when Republican voters are already expressing more doubts about the former president's candidacy for 2024. Welcome. I'm Paul Gigot, here with my redoubtable Wall Street Journal opinion colleagues Kim Strassel and Kyle Peterson. Let's listen to Adam Schiff, one Democrat who's a member of the January 6th committee, talk about the possibility of criminal referrals.
I think there's sufficient evidence to charge the president.
To get a conviction now?
Well, I don't know what the Justice Department has. I do know what's in the public record. The evidence seems pretty plain to me, but I would want to see the full body of evidence if I were in the prosecutor's shoes to make a decision.
Rare restraint for Adam Schiff there. He clearly sees that there will be criminal referrals. The leaks that we've heard so far from the committee through the press are that there are 3 potential charges. 1, fomenting an insurrection. 2, obstructing a congressional proceeding. That would be the January 6th proceeding to count the electoral votes. And then conspiracy against the United States. Kyle, what do you make of these potential criminal referrals? And how damaging will this be to the former president?
I mean, I think there are problems with these theories on the evidence that we have so far. So on the insurrection point, I don't think there's been any allegation even that President Trump was communicating with people that were rioting on January 6th, with the Oath Keepers, the Proud Boys. On the point about obstructing an official proceeding, it seems like he didn't want to obstruct the joint session of Congress. He wanted it to go his way. And he was working off this crackpot legal theory from John Eastman, a real law professor, telling him that Vice President Mike Pence could reject electoral votes or could call the joint session into recess. And so, I mean, that seems like terrible legal advice to me. I'm not sure that it's a crime, though. And then what about the First Amendment? I mean, President Trump has a right to argue that the 2020 election was stolen. Politicians dissemble all the time. And I find it hard to believe that the Justice Department's job here is to police partisan lies as examples of fraud against the United States. And so I'm skeptical on current evidence that we have the basis for a charge that would meet the standard, I think, that the Justice Department would want to meet, of convincing even some reluctant Republicans that this is a step that needs to be taken. Remember, we're talking about indicting a former president who is a current presidential candidate against the sitting president. And so I think there ought to be a pretty high bar for that. As far as the point about how it will affect Trump goes, I mean, it is remarkable to me that this is coming almost at the very moment that it seems like the Republican Party is ready to turn the corner on President Trump. There's a recent Wall Street Journal poll. Republican primary voters prefer a Florida governor, Ron DeSantis, 52% to 38%. And so if you want a way to turn around those numbers and have Trump rallying people to his side once more, I think you indict him under evidence that looks like a stretch to a lot of people.
The First Amendment point, Kim, that Kyle mentions is very significant because the former president, Donald Trump, anyone has the right to say an election was stolen. You can't deny him that. That's not a crime. So the question was merely saying that, linked somehow to this idea that it was all in service of an insurrection or of obstructing a congressional proceeding. That's sort of one problem that they have. The second one, as Kyle mentioned, is what is the actual evidence that Trump was dealing with the Proud Boys or the Oath Keepers? We know from the January 6th committee, they were the ones who breached the Capitol. They were the ones who were conspiring in advance with each other to do that. Not necessarily the Proud Boys with the Oath Keepers, but they were talking, the groups themselves were thinking about breaching the Capitol. They did. What connection did Trump have to them? Was there anyone? Now, maybe there's some evidence we haven't seen publicly of that, but we haven't seen it so far.
No, and on your point about not bringing charges against politicians,
for claiming that there's a stolen election. There'd be a lot of politicians in jail on both sides of the aisle if that had suddenly become a crime, whether it be Stacey Abrams or other politicians in the past who have cried foul over elections. Look, the Department of Justice now has been investigating the January 6th riot for 18 months and has brought dozens, if not hundreds, of charges, including a very deep dive into the Oath Keepers and Proud Boys. One would have to assume that if there was any link there at all between the president in aid of a conspiracy or in somehow helping plan them to engage in an insurrection, it would be out there. Again, maybe we don't know, but I find it almost impossible given the way news leaks about Trump in Washington. Or if the January 6th committee had in any way come up with something like that, the notion that that would be a surprise and they'd only be dropping us on us now is somewhat crazy. And all of this, I think one of the least happy people maybe in Washington this week might be Attorney General Merrick Garland, who is about to have this hot potato dropped in his lap. I think any good lawyer looking at this knows what Kyle said, that this is pretty weak stuff. You wouldn't necessarily know it from the press, which is throwing it out there as if it's obvious that these are suitable charges, but lawyers know better. And I guess the January 6th committee gets to fist pump and say, look, we did our job, but they're leaving a pretty big mess for the Department of Justice to now handle.
We should stipulate, certainly I would stipulate, that none of this, what we're saying, is a defense of Trump's conduct on January 6th, or for that matter, from the election day in 2022, January 6th. It seems to me that he's culpable for all kinds of things, not least putting Mike Pence as vice president in peril, indulging this John Eastman crackpot theory, as you called it, Kyle. But if he believed that Eastman was telling him something that was plausible, and of course, Eastman did indulge Trump's belief that he couldn't possibly have lost the election, right? One thing we know about Trump is he can't abide being perceived as a loser. So if he actually believed what Eastman was telling him, then he was acting essentially honestly about this. And any trial with his actions, even if they were outrageous, and any trial would hang to some extent, to a large extent perhaps, on what was in Donald Trump's head as he was saying these things and urging the protesters to go to march on Capitol Hill, where they then turned into rioters. The other point I would make, just following up on Kim's point about the Justice Department, seems to me that because the January 6th committee has partisan motives to some extent, this does complicate the Justice Department's decision, and it's going to color what the Justice Department does, even with the special counsel, Jack Smith, his appointment and his command from Merrick Garland to make these decisions, Kyle.
Yeah, I think that's right. I don't see what is gained by the committee waddling in here and making a referral to the Justice Department. And I should say we're taping this before that happens, but I can't imagine that they would have scheduled this hearing and this vote unless they intended to do it. But a referral, a congressional referral to the Justice Department doesn't have any legal force. It is a memo that Congress is sending over across town. And already we know that Merrick Garland has appointed this special counsel, Jack Smith, to investigate stuff related to Trump, including Trump's actions in the last days of his administration. We know because we've seen some filings that Jack Smith is not sitting on that. He has sent subpoenas, Christmas subpoenas, to local officials in a lot of these states that Trump was contesting. And so I don't understand why the January 6th committee thinks that they're improving the situation by making what amounts to a partisan gesture here. I think it will just give Trump one more excuse to say that this is another Democratic revenge campaign. And already we know that the Justice Department is looking into these things. And so I don't understand why. I think the January 6th committee has done some useful work in getting documents and getting witnesses on record under oath talking about what happened, what led up to January 6th. I think they should just let the facts speak for themselves. And by the way, I think they should release all of the facts because we're still waiting on a lot of these transcripts. So it would be really useful for third parties, nonpartisan analysts to be able to go through this information and see exactly what all of these people in Trump's orbit said in full to the committee.
The committee may make other referrals, Kim, to the Justice Department for prosecution, one of which could possibly be John Eastman, this Claremont professor who gave Trump his advice. We've been in a back and forth with Eastman about the advice he did give. I thought it was awful advice. But giving bad legal advice is not a crime. He has a First Amendment right to give legal advice as well.
Yeah, I mean, that gets to the heart of all of this. Yes, Donald Trump's behavior is absolutely terrible. Was it criminal? I think that Kyle's made very good arguments for why that's difficult to prove. Same with John Eastman. This was absolutely dreadful legal advice, and it caused a lot of problems for a lot of people in the end. He should be apologizing. But are we going to criminalize legal advice? We need to think about what that would mean in the longer term. There's also some talk that the committee could look back now at all of the different testimony it has and weigh up what one person said versus what another person said, and potentially bring people up on recommendations of perjury to the Department of Justice. We'll see if that goes anywhere. Look, overall, I think that this is just such a lost opportunity. And I think this is kind of the bigger point if you're stepping back and looking at January 6th. And you can argue over whose fault this is. Is it the Republicans' fault for not initially agreeing to an independent commission? Is it Nancy Pelosi's fault for blocking Kevin McCarthy's picks? Either way, what ended up happening is a group of like-minded people were able to sit on this committee, conduct proceedings essentially in secrecy, break a lot of kind of standards and norms along the way. For instance, the first time any committee had ever issued a subpoena to other sitting members. And so as a result, there was a real lack of trust and faith in what this committee put out in the end. I mean, can you imagine how much more powerful it would have been if there had been a bipartisan group of Republicans and Democrats who were jointly making a referral to the Department of Justice? It would have a lot more weight. And I think that really gets to the thing here. There's a lot of discussion about whether or not the committee will indeed make an ethics referral to the Ethics Committee against Kevin McCarthy and Jim Jordan and a few other members who ignored those subpoenas, making the argument that they could not be compelled to go and talk to a committee within their own chamber. That never actually made it anywhere legally because the committee, I think, wisely chose not to pursue it, but they could, as they go out the door, try to make a little mischief with an ethics referral.